A genius inventor, while deep in an experiment, suddenly finds himself unexpectedly disconnected from his own life and transported back in time. To his shock, he becomes the crown prince of the Joseon dynasty in Korean history. Armed with knowledge from the future, he begins to revolutionize the nation. While other kingdoms still rely on oil lamps, his country is illuminated by electric lights. While others use horses for travel, his nation already boasts trains. And while enemy soldiers march into battle wearing fabric armor, his forces are clad in iron armor and armed with 6-barrel guns, turning every battle into a decisive victory. Follow the journey of a 9-year-old crown prince as he reshapes his kingdom into the most powerful dynasty in history. Our story centers on Kim Jin-ho, a prodigious inventor with an unparalleled ability to create. In middle school, he successfully built a working steam engine. By high school, he was forging iron armor with the precision and skill of a master craftsman from the ancient world. In college, he designed a human-powered plane that ran without fuel. He even crafted a peculiar toy gun that packed more punch than a real firearm, an invention that almost got him arrested by the Royal Army on multiple occasions. But fate had other plans. During a sudden earthquake, Jin-ho accidentally dropped some explosive materials, triggering a disaster. In the blink of an eye, he was sent back in time, awakening in the body of a newborn baby. It didn't take long for Jin-ho to realize that his family in this life was far from ordinary. They were part of the elite upper class. Initially, he thought his parents were just typical nobles, but it didn't take long for him to discover that they were not only incredibly wealthy, but also wielded immense power. His father was the crown prince, the future king, and the 4th ruler of the Oeon dynasty in Korean history. Born into privilege, Jin-ho was a true heir to the throne, seemingly destined for greatness. Time flew by, and before he could even grasp it, he was already 4 years old. At this point, the current emperor decided it was time to pass the crown to the crown prince. With his father now ascending to the throne, Jin-ho automatically took on the title of crown prince. Like all royal children, he was expected to start his education early. However, with the mind of someone well over 30, Jin-ho found it incredibly frustrating to be treated as a child and pushed into basic lessons. In an attempt to avoid the grueling routine of studying, Jin-ho devised a clever strategy to use his father to his benefit. History had praised King Se-young the Great as a ruler who valued intellect and placed great emphasis on encouraging innovation and nurturing the brightest minds. Jin-ho's plan was to gather skilled craftsmen, introduce them to critical future knowledge, and earn his father's trust in the process. His ultimate aim was to enjoy a life of luxury, taking advantage of the rewards without lifting a finger. However, he still had to appear dedicated and studious to gain others' trust and manipulate them in his favor. The first step in Jin-ho's scheme was to win over those responsible for his education. These figures would hold influential roles in the court when he matured, making it crucial for him to secure their loyalty. The very next day, as he made his way to his studies, Jin-ho was struck by a nauseating smell. Curious, he scanned his surroundings to identify the source. There, in the grass, lay a massive pile of dung. Seriously, he thought, did people from ancient times just relieve themselves wherever they felt like it? At that moment, a group of palace maids walked by and bowed as they greeted the crown prince. Just as Jin-ho was about to continue on his way, the smell hit him again. Turning around, he saw that the last maid in the group had stepped directly into the pile, her dress now stained with filth. Jin-ho's temper flared. He immediately realized the source of the mess was a palace maid. Coming from a modern world where hygiene was a priority, he could not tolerate such unsanitary behavior. Determined to prevent this from happening again, Jin-ho decided it was time to confront his teachers. On his way to the meeting, Jin-ho began, "I saw a maid earlier with stains on her dress. It's natural for people to relieve themselves, but it's unacceptable to get it on your clothing." One teacher argued that clothing not only covers the body, but also shows one's social standing. so a little discomfort should be expected. However, Jin-ho, thinking with a modern mindset, immediately countered, even if a person wears torn clothes, their inner qualities still shine through. Don't you think judging someone based on their clothes is outdated? The teachers were left speechless, realizing they couldn't respond. Quickly, they changed the topic. This issue can't be fixed overnight, Your Highness. Do you have any other questions? Frustrated by their evasion, Jin-ho pressed on. I recently read about the invasion of Tsushima Island. It mentioned that everyone, from the nobles to the common folk, had to enlist because the military forces were too weak. Why aren't we training a proper navy? He continued his barrage of questions, leaving the teachers stammering. Also, why didn't we evacuate the civilians from the island? If the fear is that Japanese pirates would occupy the land, wouldn't it be better to move the people to northern Osan? The more Jin-ho spoke, the more the teachers began to sweat. They hadn't expected the Crown Prince to be so knowledgeable about national matters. But no matter how much Jin-ho questioned them, the elderly scholars insisted these matters were beyond their influence. Hearing this only made Jin-ho angrier, but there was little he could do. Afterward, the scholars gathered together, amazed at the Crown Prince's intelligence, especially considering he was only 5 years old. While most children his age were still playing, he was outsmarting his teachers. They agreed that if the Crown Prince was already so wise, they should teach him more advanced topics. When he became emperor, he would undoubtedly be a wise and capable ruler. Meanwhile, Jin-ho, still inside the palace, had no idea that his life had just become more difficult. He already hated studying, and now they would make him study even harder. He was still frustrated by the arrogance of the scholars. According to history, the original person who inhabited this body had passed away young from overwork. Jin-ho had planned to start making his moves when he turned 15, but given the current situation, he realized he needed to act sooner. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye, and now Jin-ho was 7 years old, officially crowned Crown Prince in front of the entire court. The ancient rituals were excessively complicated, leaving him completely drained. But after years of difficult studies, he had finally earned his position as Crown Prince. Now, he could sit in on imperial discussions with his father and the ministers, where he would be able to present his plans to develop the nation and strengthen its wealth and power. However, the biggest problem was the royal treasury. There weren't enough funds to operate. Despite being crowned Crown Prince, Jin-ho was still a 7-year-old child with no real authority. No one would listen to him. But he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He needed to start small. After writing on a piece of paper, he accidentally smudged ink all over it. Ugh, how annoying, he muttered. No matter how many times he used the brush, he couldn't get used to it. This era is just so inconvenient. Suddenly, an idea struck Jin-ho. Why not start by addressing the small daily problems instead of focusing on huge reforms? This was just the beginning. As Jin-ho walked outside, he saw the blacksmiths hard at work, molding hot iron into various shapes. This was the military supply division, an imperial facility where weapons were forged. The sight and smell of the hot metal filled him with excitement. I've missed the scent of metal, he thought. I should visit here more often and get to know the people. A supervising official approached, bowing deeply to greet the Crown Prince. Jin-ho smiled and nodded. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks to your hard work, the Zune fortresses are becoming more robust each day. The official, Lee Chong-ho, the overseer of the military supply division, felt honored by the prince's praise. It is my great honor, Your Highness, he replied respectfully. Jin-ho got straight to the point, asking, Who's the most skilled craftsman working with gold and steel here? Lee Chong-ho seemed surprised by the question. Gold and steel, Your Highness? He paused for a moment before answering. There may be someone who could help with that. After hearing Lee Chong-ho's suggestion, Jin-ho ordered the skilled blacksmith to be brought in. When the blacksmith saw the Crown Prince, He immediately knelt and bowed deeply. "I greet your highness," he said humbly. Jinho chuckled. "Humble? Don't be modest. You're working in the military supply division, responsible for strengthening Osen's defenses. How could you consider yourself humble?" The blacksmith quickly corrected himself. "Your grace, your boundless wisdom humbles me." Jinho took out a scroll and spread it on the table. "Come closer. I have something I need your help with." He placed a blueprint on the table and asked, "Can you create this?" The blacksmith examined the sketches, a puzzled look crossing his face. "What is this?" he asked. Jinho placed his hand on the table and explained, "This is meant to replace the traditional writing brush." The blacksmith's eyes widened in surprise. "It looks like something that can store ink and release it when writing, but the key feature seems to be controlling the flow of ink with each stroke." Jinho smiled, pleased that the blacksmith understood. "Exactly. Also, I need the nib to have a rounded tip to prevent excess ink from soaking into the paper. Can you also make the slit through which the ink flows as narrow as possible?" The blacksmith thought for a moment. "If I give it my best effort, I think I can make it about 5 megabytes wide." Jinho quickly worked out the measurements in his head. 5 mo. A kai is about 3 centimeters. That's about 0.15 millimeters. Do you think you can achieve that by hand? He continued. "You'll need to make several of these pens, and they must be finished quickly, not over a month's time. Since the tips will come into contact with water, we'll need to use gold and silver to prevent rust. The pens will be made from thinly hammered sheets. If the molds are correct, we could produce up to 20 pens a day." The blacksmith gestured to the drawing. "The main issue is the slit." Jinho nodded thoughtfully. "The line needs to be as fine as a single hair when writing," he said, musing to himself. "Maybe about the size of a mechanical pencil lead. 0.5 millimeters should be good." After considering the details, the blacksmith said, "I can make the slit about 1 GI wide." Jinho asked, "How long do you think it will take?" The blacksmith replied, "If you give me 2 days." Jinho immediately said, "I'll give you 3. Bring me your best finished work." The blacksmith eagerly agreed. "Understood, Your Highness." 3 days later, the blacksmith returned with the finished products. "I've created 5 nibs, each with a different line thickness. Please try them out and let me know which one you prefer." Jinho attached the nib to the pen and carefully dipped it in ink. As he made a swift stroke across the paper, the nib produced a fine, elegant line, exceeding his expectations. Jinho smiled, clearly impressed. "I love it. You did an amazing job," he said, praising the blacksmith. The blacksmith humbly replied, "It's all thanks to your guidance, Your Highness." After testing all the nibs, Jinho placed his order. "Make 100 more with this line thickness, and keep 10 in pristine condition." The blacksmith nodded immediately. "Of course, Your Highness." Jinho added, "Also, could you engrave plum blossoms on the nib of this gold pen?" Without a moment's hesitation, the blacksmith bowed and replied, "Of course, Your Highness." Han, full of excitement, inquired, "How long will it take?" The blacksmith, with unwavering confidence, assured him, "Only 10 days, Your Highness." Hyung, always cautious, replied, "I'll grant you 2 extra days, but I expect it to be flawless. I will present this to my father." Gong, the blacksmith, gave a deep bow and pledged, "I swear, there will be no flaws, Your Highness." Hyung, with one final request, added, "By the way, please keep this project a secret until I introduce it to my father." Gong quickly responded, "As you wish, Your Highness." With their conversation concluded, Hyung swiftly departed. From a distance, Lee Chong-ho, who had been watching, remarked, "His Highness is remarkably mature for his age." Gong, agreeing, replied, "I've heard he's only just turned 8, but the way he speaks and carries himself, it's as if he's 30. Lee Chong-ho, turning to him, asked, "Putting that aside, you've probably realized something by now." Isn't it wonderful to be the finest craftsman in Osen? It turned out that Gong had received a special certificate of recognition, personally given to him by Crown Prince Hyang. Gong cherished it greatly and said, "I'll need to find a skilled carpenter to make the perfect frame for this. It's truly a family heirloom in the making." Meanwhile, the nibs Hyang had requested were finally completed, adorned with intricate plum blossom engravings. When Emperor Yongnian tested the pen, he was astounded. "This is an extraordinary tool, 10 out of 10, he exclaimed. In the third year of Sai Yung's reign, the crown prince proudly presented the golden pen to the emperor. After trying it himself, the emperor was unable to contain his praise. "The wrist and arm feel so comfortable while writing with this pen. Even when writing quickly, it maintains its beauty. Truly, the crown prince has created something remarkable." Hyang humbly responded, "You are too kind, father." The emperor, pleased, declared, "The historians must record the remarkable achievement of the crown prince today." The historian, bowing respectfully, responded, "As you command, your majesty." Emperor Yongnian looked at the pen for a long moment. "You've done something truly extraordinary, crown prince," he said, noticing something special. "Is this a plum blossom?" he asked. Hyang replied quickly, "Yes, it's engraved on the nib as the royal family symbol." The emperor, filled with pride, responded, "Excellent! But how did you come up with the idea for this invention?" The emperor, eager to know, asked the crown prince to explain his reasoning. Hyang paused, thinking carefully, then responded with cleverness. "One day, when father was dipping his brush into the ink, I noticed something strange. The ink seemed to be absorbed into the bristles of the brush. Normally, water flows downward, but here the ink moved upward, defying what was expected. It fascinated me, and so I decided to create this." The emperor, impressed with his son's insight, said, "Many have used brushes, but none have observed it in the way you did. This is truly an example of learning through observation." Hyang, grateful for the praise, boldly replied, "Thank you for your kind words, father. I have one request." "Speak your mind," the emperor replied. Hyang turned to the servant and called, "Eunuch, bring them here." The servant entered, carrying a mysterious box. "Father," Hyang said, turning to the emperor, "I request that these golden pens be given to the historians and ministers of the court." The emperor, intrigued, asked, "All of these pens?" Hyang explained, "The ministers and officials who write quickly would benefit from them. The historians, who work tirelessly without rest, deserve something to ease their workload. I thought this might be helpful to them." Everyone present was taken by surprise. No one had ever thought to show such empathy toward the historians. The emperor, turning to the ministers, asked, "What do you think of the crown prince's idea?" The ministers, all in agreement, said, "We believe the crown prince is right. It's truly remarkable for someone so young to think about the well-being of his officials. It's a beautiful gesture." Finally, the emperor gave his approval. "Distribute the golden pens to the historians and court officials," he ordered. The servants quickly obeyed. Throughout the ceremony, the emperor smiled with joy, and the ministers shared in his happiness. "His Highness, the Crown Prince, truly has a deep and thoughtful mind," they remarked, while Hyang smiled contentedly. Not long after, the golden pen Hyang had created set a new trend in Yoshan. In the third year of Sai Yung's reign, after presenting the pen to the emperor, Hyang's invention was praised as a remarkable tool. The emperor, deeply impressed by the crown prince's brilliance, ordered the pen to be distributed to those in need, ensuring that Hyang's thoughtful gesture would benefit the entire court. The reaction was overwhelming. Court officials and ministers were captivated by the new invention, and the excitement surrounding it spread like wildfire. "Have you tried the golden nib pen that the crown prince invented?" one official asked. "I have, and it's truly remarkable." It became incredibly popular because it made writing official documents so much easier. Additionally, Hyang had created a portable writing board for the generals, allowing them to issue urgent orders comfortably wherever they were. The writing board was the perfect match for the golden nib pen, and everyone who used it couldn't stop praising it. "This is incredible!" they exclaimed. Emperor Uni was very pleased and ordered that both items be mass-produced, distributing them to the generals alongside the golden nib pens. The golden nib pen that Hyang had invented brought about significant changes in the kingdom. A few days later, during a court session, a minister spoke to the emperor. "There's been an unfortunate incident in the market." "An unfortunate incident?" the emperor asked. "Speak," he commanded. "There are rumors that counterfeit golden nib pens are being sold everywhere," the minister explained. "How dare they forge such a valuable item, especially one that bears the royal symbol?" "This is an outrage," the emperor exclaimed. "The punishment must be severe." The officials all agreed in unison. "We urge your majesty to punish them strictly." The emperor, remembering Hyang, said, "I believe we should consult the crown prince. After all, he is the one who invented the golden nib pen." The eunuch immediately called out, "Summon the crown prince." A short time later, Hyang arrived. "Father, you called for me?" The emperor got straight to the point. "The ministers have reported that counterfeit golden nib pens are being sold. They must be severely punished. I'd like to hear your thoughts, my son." Hyang bowed and replied, "Yes, father." He furrowed his brow in thought. Everyone's eyes were on him, waiting to hear the young prince's response, admiring how thoughtful he seemed. A few moments later, Hyang finally spoke. "Father, may I take charge of this issue?" Before anyone knew it, a month had passed, and the crown prince made his move. Hyang calmly entered the Ministry of Revenue. At his arrival, every official quickly knelt and bowed with the utmost respect. "Your Highness, we honor the crown prince," they said in unison. Hyang looked at them with a calm demeanor. "So, do you understand why I'm here?" He held up a pen. One official's face turned ashen at the sight of it, and no one dared to lift their gaze. "None of us would allow our guilds to be part of such a disgraceful act," one official nervously replied. "My guild would never be involved in something like this," another added in defense. Hyang observed them briefly, then replied, "I'm not here to point fingers at you. Stand up." Cold sweat dripped down their faces, and their hands trembled as Hyang's next action was to slam his hand on the table, his voice lowering in authority. "Don't make me repeat myself. What do you think you're doing? Stand up immediately." The officials stood shakily, regaining their composure, as Hyang took his seat, exuding confidence. "Let me be clear. I am ready to award the production of both golden nib pens and ordinary pens to one of your guilds. However, those producing the golden nib pens will be required to give 20% of their earnings to the royal court. Furthermore, the retail price of the pens must not exceed 60% more than what it costs to produce them." An official, clearly uncomfortable, hesitated before speaking up. "Your Highness, if I may, there's an issue." He carefully explained his point. While a 60% markup seems generous, factoring in the wages of the workers and the sellers, we'd only be left with a 30% profit. With the 20% taken by the court, that leaves us with just 10%. At that moment, Hyang's expression darkened. He slammed his hand onto the table in frustration. "Are you lying to me?" The official fell silent, realizing his mistake. Hyang pointed at him and barked, "I said 20% of the 30% profit. That means you'd only keep about 6%, not 10%. Take this dishonest fool out of my sight and strip his guild of their bidding rights." The man froze, stammering for a reply, but two soldiers swiftly dragged him away, ignoring his desperate pleas. "Please, Your Highness, have mercy." One of the officials glanced nervously toward Hyang, but no one dared speak as the room became tense with silence. Hyang's tone remained firm. "Both my father and I agree that the prosperity of merchants and commoners is vital. No one can thrive alone. Everyone needs assistance in life. He suddenly stood up, his voice rising with authority. However, if any of you dare to deceive like he did, you will be seen as nothing more than trash. Understand? All the officials bowed deeply and responded together. We will remember, Your Highness. With Hiang's position now made clear, the bidding process for the golden nib pen moved forward without further deception. Hiang called for the eunuch to meet him privately. A sly grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. You did well, eunuch. I wouldn't dare, Your Highness. The eunuch replied, his brow furrowed. But, if I may ask, why did you take such drastic measures? Hiang let out a quiet sigh. You know, I'm still young and lacking in experience. I don't have many other options. The eunuch nodded in understanding. Indeed, Your Highness. Well, if you'll permit me, I'll take my leave now. Go ahead, Hiang replied, his heart filled with satisfaction. Good, everything is going smoothly. Just keep this up. But then, a sudden interruption. An official spoke out. Your Highness, I, Grand Chamberlain Su-am, have an urgent matter to discuss, he said in a stern voice. We can no longer proceed with the Crown Prince's plan, the official informed the Emperor with a resolute tone. Your Majesty, I, Grand Minister Su-am, must report something of great importance. This was the first time Hiang had encountered such political maneuvering. With a determined gaze, he turned toward the man. Su-am spoke again, his words final. We cannot continue with the Crown Prince's plan, Your Majesty. Since Hiang's reincarnation, he had been showered with endless praise and laughter, particularly as the royal treasury flourished. Everyone was overjoyed by the financial success that followed the introduction of golden nib pens. The economic situation had steadily improved, generating revenue like never before. Thanks to this, King Sejong and the ministers began to pay closer attention to the benefits of trade. The emperor praised Hiang, saying, "The crown prince has truly done something remarkable." However, those less fond of the prince began meeting in secrecy. A small group of conspirators huddled together, discussing in hushed tones. How can the court turn into a marketplace? The merchants will become the lowest class in society. The emperor and the officials are showing far too much favoritism toward them, one man said, stroking his beard. This all originates from the crown prince. We must act swiftly to reveal this to the emperor, or else things will continue to spiral downward. The group agreed. No matter how clever the crown prince is, he is still just a child. It is a grave error to allow a child to decide such important matters. But before they could carry their complaints to the emperor's father, Grand King Tejong, passed away on the 10th of May during the 4th year of Sejong's reign. Grand King Tejong died at the age of 56, forcing the conspirators to delay their plans. It seems we'll have to wait for a better opportunity, one said, and the others reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Hiang was overwhelmed with work day and night. He buried himself in book after book. So the books from Europe in this era come here through China, he mused, hands on his hips and a confident expression on his face. Hopefully, this will help me with the source of my inspiration. If I claim these ideas as my own, they'll grow suspicious. Hiang's face darkened. I need to figure out how to deceive them. Everything was proceeding as planned. During the formal court presentation, Hiang spoke with clarity and logic. Therefore, I believe it would be far more practical if we adopted these Indian numerals, or, as the Westerners call them, Arabic numerals, for use in our country. The ministers reacted. Minister of Revenue, Kim Jung, spoke up first. After careful thought, I believe these Indian numerals would indeed be useful for representing numbers. Minister of Rights Hayad Du also agreed, saying, I share that opinion. The emperor quickly made his decision. With the support of these two important ministries, we will allow the use of Indian numerals starting next month. If the results are favorable, we will implement them nationwide. Everyone responded in unison, We obey, Your Majesty. As the next petition was read, the emperor paused. "I think the crown prince should hear this." Hyang, confused, replied, "Yes, father?" The emperor rubbed his temples, looking weary. "The emperor of the Ming has sent a letter. Emperor Zhonggle is very pleased with the golden nib pens and has requested that we send an additional 10,000 as tribute." Hyang knew the royal treasury was struggling and immediately began formulating a plan. A sudden idea struck him. "Father, what if the court were to establish its own guild?" At the mention of the word guild, everyone was shocked. "How could that be?" "Minister of Rights," Heen protested. The emperor motioned for him to be quiet. "The crown prince has more to say. Continue," he urged. Hyang began explaining in detail. Since the emperor of the Ming has requested more pens, it's clear they are in high demand in the Ming dynasty. With its vast territory and large population, the number of literate people there must be far greater than in our nation. If we collaborate with merchants to handle the production of golden nib pens, we could easily meet the Ming dynasty's demands, and then some. The emperor listened thoughtfully. Minister Kim Jung was already calculating in his head. If we base our projections on that, both the emperor and I can expect considerable profit. Hyang continued, "We can also arrange for merchants to accompany our diplomatic missions to the Ming dynasty. In return, the merchants would only need to cover their lodging expenses." Minister Su Am growled in protest. "No, we cannot proceed with the crown prince's plan." He presented his concerns. While the crown prince's plan would certainly bring wealth to the court, if we grow too rich, the people may become self-indulgent, leading to luxury and excess. This could result in tyranny, and the royal family's power would be compromised. Another official spoke up. "I, the Minister of Rights, agree with Minister Su Am. How could we allow such lowly merchants to accompany a diplomatic mission to the Emperor of Ming? It would tarnish the honor of our nation, Yosan." Hyang, determined, asked Minister Swam, "Do you think we should continue to live in poverty and find joy in it, as some claim a king should? Have you seen any commoners who truly wish to live in poverty and remain virtuous? They suffer from droughts, starvation, and freezing winters. Who would praise their virtue?" With authority, Hyang continued, "Even a noble would do anything to feed his starving child. A king should be no different. A king is the father of his people. Shouldn't a father act to care for his children?" The emperor, visibly moved, declared, "My son speaks wisely." No one dared to challenge Hyang further, and the scribes quickly recorded the emperor's words. With the court in silence, Hyang passionately continued, "For the prosperity of our kingdom and to save our people, we must take action." The emperor, once again impressed, praised his son. "My son speaks wisely."
The emperor took a brief moment to steady himself, while Hyang, noticing this, pressed on as the court remained in expectant silence. "Go on," the emperor urged. "Yes, father," Hyang responded. "The ministers and nobles beyond the palace walls can endure hunger because they understand both the reason and necessity behind it. However, the common people do not possess such knowledge, nor do they comprehend how to withstand such suffering. If we truly wish to educate them, shouldn't we first ease their burdens by lessening their hunger?" The emperor slammed his hand onto the table. "Precisely." The entire court watched in stunned silence. Hyang thought to himself, "Father's growing too agitated. Perhaps I should end things here for today." Yet, he continued, "Throughout history, it has been said that the will of the people reflects the will of heaven. Even if we, as rulers, uphold virtue, what would the gods think if our people remain in despair? Moreover, it is often said, 'Man proposes, but heaven disposes.' If we have done all that is within our power, should we not then wait to see how the heavens respond? Yet whenever droughts or plagues befall the land, ministers are quick to claim that it is due to the emperor's waning virtue, insisting that preserving virtue takes precedence over all else. Is that not a contradiction?" Hyang then turned to the court. Many among you have served since before this dynasty came to be. Then tell me, why was King Tao never accused of losing virtue when he established this very kingdom while still a subject of Goryeo? Or what of my grandfather, King Taejong? Was he devoid of virtue for raising his sword against his own brothers? And what of my father? Is he lacking in virtue because he ascended the throne instead of his elder brother, the rightful heir? Grand Minister Swam immediately interjected, his voice urgent. Your Highness, that is not what we meant. He turned to the Emperor in desperation. Your Majesty, we have never entertained such treasonous thoughts. We beg your Majesty for mercy. The ministers followed in unison. Please, your Majesty, grant us mercy. The Emperor, his expression firm yet composed, finally spoke. The Crown Prince's words may have been severe, but I trust the ministers will not take offense. Hyang, mind your words in the future. Yes, Father, I will be more careful, Hyang responded swiftly. The Emperor then addressed the court. I want you all to understand, I, too, believe that ensuring the well-being of the people is of utmost importance. Furthermore, the tribute to the Ming Emperor will proceed according to the Crown Prince's proposal. The officials lowered their heads in compliance. As your Majesty commands. The Emperor turned back to Hyang. Do you have anything more to add? Hyang immediately replied, rather than simply distributing food as charity, I believe it would be wiser to provide sustenance in exchange for labor, Father. The Emperor, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. You propose paying them? Hyang elaborated. Droughts are not solely caused by a lack of rainfall. Our limited irrigation systems and neglected reservoirs also play a significant role. If we wish to prevent future disasters, we must construct water storage facilities in every town and restore the ones that have fallen into disrepair. By enlisting the people for this task and compensating them with food, we can address both hunger and infrastructure at once. Would this not be solving two problems at once? He turned toward the ministers. What do you all think? The court officials, after a brief murmur of agreement, responded unanimously, Your Highness, this is an excellent proposal. The Emperor gave a firm nod before issuing his command. Crown Prince, return to the palace. Hyang bowed deeply. Yes, Father. Just as he was about to leave, the Emperor seemed to recall something. And do not forget, you must prepare to take part in state discussions once the ancestral rites have concluded. Thank you, Father, for granting your inexperienced son the opportunity to partake in such matters, Hyang replied before turning to depart. Rising from his seat, the Emperor declared, Court is adjourned. You are all dismissed. As your Majesty commands, the court echoed. Yet before anyone could move, the Emperor's voice suddenly deepened, taking on a graver tone. One more thing, he added. Perhaps it is time I truly consider something. Tell me, what do you all honestly think of this dynasty? The ministers were gripped by fear. Your Majesty, we would never even dream of betraying you, they pleaded desperately. Please, have mercy. The Emperor's expression turned cold. Go back to your duties, he commanded. Mercy, Your Majesty, they echoed as they hurriedly left the hall. Outside, murmurs spread among the officials. One misstep and disaster could strike, one whispered. He isn't just King Tao's descendant. His lineage is deeply tied to the previous rulers as well. Grand Minister Sum shot them a stern look. Enough of that nonsense. If you value your positions, you'll be careful with what you say. Another official sighed. I can't help but wonder, is this truly the path our nation is headed down? The others exchanged cautious glances before one warned, You should know by now. Careless words can lead to ruin. Suum exhaled slowly. We made a grave error today. We dismissed the Crown Prince because of his youth, but he has proven to be far more formidable than we expected. One minister hesitated before asking, "Then, what do we do now?" Suum's expression darkened. "If it comes to it, we may have no choice but to submit a formal resignation." The suggestion stunned the others. "Resign?" Suum folded his arms. "Our role is to guide the ruler, ensuring he stays on the right path. Even ancient texts say that a wise leader listens to the voice of his people. We must make sure the emperor remains wise." His tone carried a weight of unspoken intent. When King Si Yunk's order was proclaimed, the Ministry of Revenue set to work crafting golden nib pens, intended as tribute for Emperor Jongle. However, an issue soon arose. The emperor's expression darkened. "What do you mean they won't meet the deadline?" A court official bowed low. "Your Majesty, I beg your forgiveness, but the Merchant Guild responsible for the pens has informed us that they cannot produce the required amount in time." Jinho had anticipated this. Given the current state of Joseon's workshops, meeting such a demand within the given time frame was unrealistic. After a brief pause, he addressed his father. "Your Majesty, I need to clarify something. May I summon the leader of the Merchant Guild?" Suum immediately protested. "This is unacceptable. A mere merchant has no place in affairs of the state." The emperor remained composed. "Grand Secretary, you knew exactly how I would respond. Yet you still chose to interrupt me, didn't you?" Realizing his mistake, Suum hesitated. "Your Majesty, The emperor continued, his tone unwavering. "I acknowledge your loyalty, but instead of dismissing every proposal outright, why not present an actual alternative?" Lowering his head, Suum murmured, "I seek your Majesty's pardon." The emperor dismissed the matter. "Summon the merchant at once." Not long after, the guild's representative was brought before the court and knelt. "Your humble servant greets your Majesty." The emperor gestured toward Jinho. "The Crown Prince has a question for you. Answer honestly." "Yes, your Majesty," the merchant responded. Jinho's gaze was steady. "I understand that your guild is unable to fulfill the order on time. What is the reason for this delay?" The merchant bowed his head slightly. "Golden nib pens require meticulous craftsmanship. Each piece must be crafted with precision and care. Even if we work faster, there are limits to how many can be made within the time frame." Jinho considered this. "So, the entire process relies on a single artisan for each pen?" "That is correct, Your Highness," the merchant confirmed. "A skilled craftsman must handle each one individually." After a moment's thought, Jinho turned to his father. "Your Majesty, I believe I have a solution. However, I will need to speak with the artisans directly." Suum reacted immediately, his voice rising in protest. "Your Majesty, first a merchant. Now the prince wishes to summon mere craftsmen to the royal court? This cannot be allowed." The emperor's patience wore thin. "Grand Secretary, silence yourself. Why should I not summon them when this matter concerns the kingdom itself?" Suum, still displeased, attempted to argue. "Your Majesty, But the emperor had heard enough. "If you persist in arguing, I may begin to doubt your loyalty," the emperor warned, his voice heavy with authority. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. No one dared to challenge him further. With a firm gesture, the emperor commanded, "Summon the craftsmen at once." When the artisans arrived, Jinho addressed them directly. "I've been told that each of you is responsible for crafting an entire golden nib pen from start to finish. Is that correct?" The craftsmen, kneeling, responded in unison. "Yes, Your Highness." Jinho gave a thoughtful nod before continuing. "I have a proposal. Rather than each craftsman handling the entire process alone, Why not divide the labor? One person could shape the nib, another could refine it, and a third could engrave the final details. Would this method improve efficiency? The craftsmen exchanged startled glances before one of them hesitantly replied, "It may be possible, Your Highness. We would need time to adjust, but once accustomed to the process, we should be able to produce the pens much faster than before." Jinho smiled. This concept is called division of labor. When tasks are shared among many, production increases significantly. The emperor, clearly impressed, nodded approvingly. That logic is sound. We shall look forward to seeing the results. You may return to your work. After the artisans had departed, the emperor turned to his son. Division of labor to boost productivity. How did you conceive such an ingenious idea, Crown Prince? Jinho hesitated for a moment before answering. I observed the kitchen staff. The assistants and maids follow the head chef's instructions, each performing specific tasks instead of cooking a dish alone. That observation led me to this conclusion. The emperor let out a hearty laugh. A brilliant mind indeed. To derive such wisdom from everyday occurrences, truly extraordinary. Ministers, what are your thoughts? The officials bowed and responded in agreement. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince is exceptionally wise. However, Soom, unwilling to conform, voiced his dissent. Your Majesty, I fear the Crown Prince is wasting his intellect on insignificant matters. His sharp mind would be better directed toward studying the teachings of the sages. The Emperor's expression darkened. Why do you dismiss deep thought and insight as trivial? Did the great scholars not also reflect on matters that benefit the nation and its people? Or is it that you, Grand Secretary, refuse to acknowledge wisdom unless it comes from your beloved classics? Soom, realizing he had overstepped, quickly bowed. I only wish for the Crown Prince's growth, Your Majesty. The Emperor's patience wore thin. Is this not exactly what the Crown Prince mentioned the other day? That you believe my rule, and that of my ancestors, unworthy? Is that why you dare to speak such nonsense? Panic flashed across Soom's face as he stammered, Your Majesty, I would never entertain such disloyal thoughts. Please, I beg you to understand my intentions. Another minister, watching the exchange in silence, mused to himself, Soom may have been narrow-minded, but to suppress dissent so harshly. It is unwise for a ruler to silence opposing voices, no matter how talented his heir may be. Jinho, too, observed his father carefully. He's revealing his true nature again. Later, when Jinho returned to the Eastern Palace, he shut the door behind him and exhaled deeply. That was intense. If I hadn't thought of the division of labor in time, I wonder how things would have unfolded. He sat in contemplation. Come to think of it, division of labor doesn't even exist in this era. Though Adam Smith later formalized it, it had been practiced long before him. Historically, industrialized labor systems were shaped through agreements between absolute monarchs and market policies. But what about Rhone? Though it claims to be an absolute monarchy, in reality it is a battleground, between the king striving to uphold his authority and officials pushing for a republican system. Meanwhile, the common people yearned for a semi-republican government. If a ruler truly prioritizes his people over his officials, he can secure their support, thereby consolidating real power. Success won't come overnight. I must build this foundation piece by piece, ensuring my father's authority extends to the most remote corners of the kingdom. And for that, I need wealth. Determined, Jinho stood. The first step is clear. I will fill the treasury. Resolute in his decision, the Crown Prince left the Eastern Palace and made his way toward the main hall.